When Russia invaded Ukraine, Putin thought that he had all of the defenses that he needed. Ukraine couldn't hit Russia anyway. It had no missiles. What did Russia have to worry about? The wannabe emperor would soon be crowned as Ukraine's ruler. But the emperor has no clothes, and neither does his country. Russia just became naked before Ukraine, setting up repeated shots to Putin's crown jewels. Blow after blow is crushing everything in Russia as Ukraine has gone from prey to predator. Ukraine is now the aerial hunter. It owns the skies, as Russia's entire defense network is on the verge of collapse. Nobody could have expected this. For most of the Ukraine war, the focus has been rightly placed on what Ukraine could do to defend itself against Russia's combined ground assault and constant aerial bombardments. Going on the attack wasn't the subject of conversation. That was especially the case back in 2022. But even as little as a year ago, the talk was about how Ukraine could use its ever-improving drone technology to create a wall of defenses against Russia's unrelenting attacks. The mood up until recently was summed up perfectly in a July 2025 article by the Atlantic Council. The Ukrainian military's innovative and rapidly evolving use of unmanned aerial vehicles to create a layered defense is often referred to as a drone wall, the article declared, with the rest of the focus being placed on how the development of Ukraine's defenses could create the blueprint that all of Europe could follow to build a continent-spanning drone wall of its own. It's certainly true that Ukraine's drone mastery is and will continue to be key to the country's defense. But 2026 has brought with it a major change in how Ukraine's drones are perceived. Once the defenders, restricted to taking out Russian projectiles and racking up casualties on the front, those drones have evolved into outright killers. As we move into 2026, something changed about how Ukraine was using drones. Suddenly, the deep strikes onto Russian territory that were taking out energy and military infrastructure were being accompanied by strikes in the middle range. Hordes of new drones started flying beyond the front lines, crashing down on Russian logistics, command posts and supply lines to degrade Putin's forces on the front. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Ukraine was going on the attack with weapons that were supposed to aid its defense, and Russia started to become exposed. How did this happen? Blame Putin's arrogance and his inability to even consider the possibility that Ukraine could ever develop any sort of long or medium-range capabilities. Putin was wrong, and much to his horror, Ukraine used its growing drone capabilities to start striking the one thing that Russia needed to guard itself against the attacking drone wall that Ukraine has unleashed. Russian air defenses have been crumbling by the hundreds. The nation that was once the prey has evolved into the predator that rules the skies, and in doing so, it has exposed Russia. Forces in the occupied territories are naked, devoid of the air defenses that were supposed to protect them. Inside Russia itself, Ukraine has gone from attacking border regions and infrastructure to launching strikes against the crown jewels of Russia, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. This was all part of Ukraine's plan. And thanks to a report by the Tochny Open Source Collective, we can see that it was a plan that was months in the making. That collective was able to verify 1,530 of what it calls kinetic actions against Russian targets both in the mainland and occupied Ukraine between June 2025 and March 2026. It's a fancy way of saying drone and missile strikes, but what's really interesting here is what Ukraine chose to target in the majority of these attacks. Of the 1,530, 493 strikes were conducted against Russian air defense infrastructure, which includes air defense systems themselves as well as radars and similar supporting equipment. That's about a third of all of Ukraine's strikes over the course of about 3/4 of a year, but it didn't end there. Also on the A2AD assets, of which Ukraine's drones struck 433. A2AD stands for Anti-Access Area Denial, and it's a military term used to describe anything that an army uses to prevent an enemy from gaining access to territory that the army holds. We're talking about things like electronic warfare systems, which are often used to send drones flying off course, and even choppers and aircraft that can be used to take out the drones that Ukraine fires. In other words, assets that support Russia's attempts to defend the skies over the territories that it's stolen. Since Tochny's initial report, Ukraine has leaned even further into its strategy of destroying Russian air defenses. Now, 54.8% of Ukraine's strikes are designed to take out air defenses, as Ukraine builds on an already consistent campaign to defang a nation that has for so long been trying to take bites out of Ukraine's sovereign territory. Ukraine isn't just on the defensive anymore. It's on the attack, aerially speaking, And those attacks have been made possible because Ukraine has stripped away the defenses that were supposed to stop them. The very weapons that were designed to kill Ukraine's drones have fallen to the one thing they were supposed to stop. Now, the rest of Russia and the occupied territories are feeling the same pain. As Tochny puts it, the bear has been blinded, and we only need to look at what Ukraine has been doing to Russia, both in the occupied territories and Russia itself, to see what that means. The strike tells the full story. All across the R280 Novorossiya highway that connects Russia's Rostov region to Crimea and the occupied Ukrainian south, drones are flying and trucks are burning. Travel across that highway is now being restricted following Ukraine's destruction of 150 vehicles by June 1st, and likely many dozens, if not hundreds more since. This highway is the land bridge that connects Russia to Crimea. It's absolutely vital for Russia to keep its supplies flowing into the occupied peninsula, as well as into Ukraine's south. But now it's been rendered practically unusable by a new generation of middle-range drones. The crippling of this land bridge was made possible by Ukraine's destruction of so many of Russia's air defenses, and there are so many more examples. In June, Ukraine sent drones to strike the Chernar Bridge in the Kherson Oblast. That bridge is another logistical artery connecting Crimea to Ukraine's occupied south, and Ukraine has identified it as another target to take out now that Russia's air defenses have crumbled. On June 9th, the Kherson puppet governor, Volodymyr Saldo, revealed that Ukraine has carried out a follow-up strike against the bridge, once again damaging it in the wake of a June 7th attack that had already forced Russia to divert drivers down different routes. Repeated attacks shouldn't be possible. Even if you give Russia some grace for failing to stop the June 7th strike, it should have put air defenses in place to stop the second attack on June 9th. Russia failed. Not because it didn't want to install defenses or that it failed to see the importance of the Chernar Bridge. Russia's problem is that losing hundreds upon hundreds of air defense assets has left its defenses utterly threadbare. What little clothing Russia wore in the occupied territories to defend itself has been torn off, leaving an exposed and naked army that can't do anything to stop Ukraine's drones. That's why we see repeated attacks. Russia knows they're coming, but it doesn't have the defenses it needs to do something about the incoming hordes. It's not just occupied Ukraine that is feeling the pain of the death of Russia's air defenses. St. Petersburg, which is Putin's hometown and the crown jewel of Russian opulence, has also been struck. Putin chose that city to host the annual International Economic Forum that Russia puts on to showcase the supposed strength of its economy and build relationships with other nations. The Russian Davos, as it's being called, ran from June 3rd for 3 days. Ukraine bookended the event with drone strikes, first hitting key facilities around St. Petersburg on the opening day of the forum, and then following up with more attacks as the forum ended. The timing wasn't coincidental. Ukraine wanted Russia to know that it could hit St. Petersburg at any time, and it chose a time when all eyes were on the city. Think about what that means. This event was a showcase for Russia. St. Petersburg would have been as well defended as it could possibly be to ensure nothing went wrong, and it still didn't matter. Ukraine's drones broke through Russia's air defenses, which tells you everything you really need to know about the state of those defenses. These attacks also came in the wake of Russia's pitiful Victory Day parades. These parades, which are supposed to be another major showcase, this time of Russia's military might, were toned down to the point where not a single piece of military equipment was on display as the parade trundled through Moscow's Red Square. Why? Well, Russia was terrified that Ukraine would use the parade as an opportunity to strike, and it knew that the crumbling air defense network inside Russia wouldn't be able to stop a large enough drone swarm. As Christian Terres, who is a member of the European Parliament, puts it, Leningrad and Moscow regions are highly populated and economically vital for Russia's war machine. Ukraine is successfully executing classic economic and psychological warfare against them. This is the situation that Ukraine has created with its attacks on Russia's air defenses. They've been degraded to the point where all of Russia and the occupied territories are vulnerable. And none of this is going to get any better for Russia. What was once Russia's greatest strength has been transformed into its biggest weakness, and that's a game changer in the Ukraine war. But before we explain why, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you like what you see from our channel, make sure you hit subscribe so that you never miss a video. Here's what all of this means for Russia as Putin continues his ruinous campaign to take Ukraine. Russia is now naked. It doesn't have enough air defenses to even come close to protecting all of its assets. And that comes not from us or Ukraine, but from the head of the Estonian Ministry of Defense's Defense Readiness Department, Gert Kaju. He says that Russia is expending what remains of its air defense missiles at an alarming rate, which means it's running low on missiles just as much as it's running low on the systems used to fire them. In the Russian rear, inside occupied Ukraine, Russia's defenses have been degraded to the point where Ukraine has achieved localized pockets of air superiority that give the country control over undefended skies. In addition to the R-280, Ukraine is carrying out strikes against the M14 and M04 highways, along with parts of the H20 highway that connects these two roads to Donetsk. None of this should be happening because Russia's air defenses should be preventing the strikes, but they aren't. Ukraine is destroying them all. What Russia now has is an increasingly blind empire, at least when it comes to dealing with threats from the skies. If it's not air defense systems being destroyed, it's radars. The latter are expensive to replace, and losing them means that an otherwise functional air defense system can't hit the broadside of a barn, never mind a small drone that is on its way to the next strike. Ukraine now has a three-layered strategy in play. FPV drones are striking deeper than ever before, reaching 35 kilometers behind the front lines to cripple Russian equipment and soldiers attempting to launch attacks. Middle-range drones are striking convoys and air defenses 150 kilometers away from the front, which not only sets the stage for middle-range strikes, but also creates safe aerial corridors for long-range drones to fly through en route to Russia itself. As for Russia, it's in panic mode. The Kyiv Post reports that Russian military bloggers are now arguing that military convoys need to have their own radars, electronic warfare, and mobile air defense systems to guard themselves against Ukraine's drones. A reasonable argument, perhaps, but where is Russia going to get all of these assets when Ukraine is already devastating its air defense network? Other war bloggers are turning their anger toward Putin and his cronies, arguing that they have failed to achieve the objectives of the special military operation, and Russia is now more vulnerable than it was when Putin launched his full-scale invasion in 2022. The New Voice of Ukraine reports that these bloggers are becoming braver and more outspoken in their criticism of Putin, having previously directed their criticism at the generals that Russia's leader chose. RBC Ukraine says that this criticism is being felt deep in the bowels of the Kremlin, to the point where Russia is trying to censor its military bloggers by cracking down on the social media channels they use, such as Telegram. That's a pretty typical response from Putin. When faced with a very real problem, he tries to hide the issue rather than confront it. Ukraine is intent on making the problem that Putin faces even worse. The Financial Times reports that Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reported that Ukraine built 441% more reconnaissance drones during the first 4 months of 2026 than it did during the same period in 2025. These are the drones that scope out Russian positions and identify air defense assets to attack. Ukraine also increased its production of mid-strike drones by 312% during the same period, ensuring that it has the weapons available to launch attacks when the reconnaissance drones find ideal targets. But the real problem is this: Ukraine shattering so much of Russia's air defense network that its drones are able to penetrate into the crown jewel cities such as Moscow and St. Petersburg is bad enough. But the real issue for Putin is that there seems to be no real way for Russia to reverse course and get its clothes back on. Russia is trying to find solutions. The development of the Zak-30 Citadel is one of them. This isn't exactly a new air defense weapon, rather it's a type of turret built around existing 30mm guns that combine radar, automated fire control, and electro-optical tracking to allow those guns to fire programmable airburst ammunition. It's clear that Russia is trying to find better solutions for dealing with the Ukrainian drones that so often circumvent and destroy the more advanced air defense systems. A smart idea this may be, especially when it comes to the cost of countering Ukraine's drones. But a handful of guns isn't going to do much to solve the much broader air defense problems that Russia has, and it seems unlikely that they will be deployable at a large enough scale for them to make a real difference. And that hints at Russia's real problem that lies behind all of this. Combine the country and the occupied territories and you have far too much land to protect with a dwindling stockpile of air defense systems and missiles. Makeshift solutions like the Zak-30 Citadel do nothing to solve the problem of Russia not being able to build more air defense systems and missiles to replace those that it's losing to Ukraine. Russia also isn't helping itself on the missile front. In a June 5th report, Euromaidan Press revealed that Russia has started converting air defense missiles into weapons that it can fire to boost its ballistic missile strikes against Ukraine. Apparently, Russia has doubled the rate of these conversions, which means that its aerial assaults are going to become more powerful. But the trade-off for this power is the loss of air defense missiles that are already in very short supply. This is a short-sighted strategy that reveals how desperate Russia has become. It's cannibalizing the very weapons that it needs more than anything else right now to allow it to throw some more Hail Mary haymakers at Ukraine. Russia is hoping to score a knockout blow because it doesn't want the world to know that what we're really seeing here is a last desperate grasp at victory. Again, we're not seeing the solution to the core problem, which is that Russia was already too big to defend, and its size has become an even greater liability following Ukraine's dismantlement of the Russian air defense network. According to the Atlantic Council, around a quarter of Russia's landmass is now within the reach of Ukraine's drones. That may not seem so impressive until you realize that 70% of Russia's population occupies this territory, which also means that the vast majority of Russia's key military, industrial, and energy assets are also within Ukraine's strike range. For Russia, this is still too much territory to protect, and it means that Russia faces a difficult decision whenever another air defense system or radar goes down. Does it replace the shattered system? With Russia's air defense production being limited, a replacement usually means pulling a system from another location. One area has to be weakened to reinforce another that has already proven to be vulnerable to Ukraine's drones. But if a replacement isn't sourced, those same drones will just strike again. We saw Ukraine do just that at the Chernar Bridge, and it crippled a key Russian logistical route in the process. There is no correct decision for Russia here. No matter what option is chosen, something that Russia wants to protect and Ukraine wants to hit becomes vulnerable. Russia's vulnerability is all too clear, the Atlantic Council says, adding, even in the most favorable circumstances, the Kremlin would find it extremely challenging to organize a truly effective nationwide air defense network. That's a good point. Even if Russia weren't dealing with Ukraine's ever-expanding drone threat, it wouldn't be able to properly protect its territory. It will be forced to rely on sheer size and a vague hope that the weapons its enemy produces don't have the range to hit anything. Ironically, that also means that regions such as the Russian Far East are underprotected, which means that Russia can't even pull air defenses from those regions to replace systems lost in the areas that are within Ukraine's range. Again, we see a whole lot of problems for which Russia has no solutions. When we say Russia is naked, this is what we mean. Its air defense network, which was already too weak to protect everything, has been exposed and degraded. Ukraine will just keep building. More strikes in the occupied territories will come, which sets up yet more attacks inside Russia. What we've seen so far in 2026 is impressive enough, but it's also far from the peak of what Ukraine can do. As more air defenses go down and drone production continues to scale, the exposed crown jewels of the Russian Empire will get hit harder. Putin will be brought to his knees, and when he looks up with tear-filled eyes, all he will see is more Ukrainian drones. Ukraine's genius strategy has also put it in a position to strike locations that nobody has ever hit before. It just did that earlier in June. The target, the Kronstadt Naval base near St. Petersburg. For the first time ever, Ukraine's drones flew right into that vital Baltic base and struck a target. What did they hit? How did Ukraine pull this off? We'll find out the answers to those questions and more in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to the channel to see more of us picking apart Russia's failings in our videos. And thank you as always for watching.